Hi, my name is Lee Grissom, and I'm responding to this week's discussion board assignment. We were asked to discuss what nonverbal cues we rely on in communication, and I gave that some thought, and I guess there are quite a few. I guess the first one, our text referred to as paralanguage. A nonverbal cue that I attend to often is the volume that a person uses in their communication. If they're really loud, I might assume that they're angry or anxious or excited. If they're really soft-spoken, I might assume that they're sad or depressed or discouraged. So I use that as a nonverbal cue. I also use body movements or body language. One that I seem to notice quite often is whether or not a person has their arms crossed when they're talking to me. If their arms are crossed, I might perceive that they are closed off or defensive, maybe angry, or maybe even protecting themselves, and expresses a level of discomfort in the verbal exchange. Another nonverbal cue that quite often says a lot would be eye contact. The way I perceive eye contact in communication, if someone is unwilling to or uncomfortable or doesn't make eye contact with me, then I might assume that they're shy or embarrassed or uncomfortable with the conversation. If they do make eye contact with me for too long or for a prolonged period of time, I might misread it as aggressive or inappropriate. So there's a delicate balance with how much eye contact I'm comfortable with personally in communication. Another nonverbal is when people talk with their hands. A lot of times if it's too much or excessive, I might assume that a person is performing or fake, or maybe they just have a huge need for attention. It seems like a very flamboyant thing calls quite a bit of attention to that person. So I might question their sincerity or their interest in other people. If they talk quite a bit with their hands, I might see them as a self-centered person. I realize that some of these, the way I read these nonverbal cues might be inaccurate. This whole study in Chapter 8 has made me question whether I can really know and understand another person. The text did refer to nonverbal cues as being more accurate as what we say verbally, the verbal content. But also it shed quite a bit of light on how that varies between cultures, how nonverbal cues mean different things. So that's something that it's something to be aware of, and it's very interesting. Makes me question whether my understanding of people's nonverbal cues is accurate. I also want to talk about how directly someone communicates. If they're very direct, I appreciate that in communication. I interpret it as sincerity. If they're indirect in their communication, I would interpret that as being avoidant or lacking commitment to the relationship or the conversation. And I'm also might interpret that as an insecure person or someone with something to hide if they don't appear to be forthcoming in honesty and integrity. So that's sort of my take on nonverbal cues that I tend to rely on in communication. We were also asked to consider why we believe it's important to pay attention to nonverbal messages. And as I mentioned earlier, the text points out that the nonverbal cues or messages are often much more reflective of reality than what we actually say. As a counselor, I'll need to pay attention to nonverbal messages that I'm sending. And a couple that I think about in my work as a middle school counselor are when my students come into my office, I try to get up from behind my desk and go and sit in the chair beside them, just to indicate less distance in like levels of authority, I guess, to hopefully lower any barrier and to establish a rapport with the students. If a student is crying or upset, I might ask if it's okay if I put my hand on their shoulder or on their arm. Sometimes I'll touch them on the arm and then ask, is that okay? Do you mind if I rest my hand on your arm? And sometimes they'll say no, and I'll take my hand away. So I try to be very sensitive to whether touch is welcoming or comforting to that nonverbal message is how it's received. Also, with an emotional client, or student, I try to allow silence to respect their emotional dignity, give them a chance to gather themselves, and give them a moment to share if they want to, or just a space to be quiet and be alone and I guess recover from anything that's been emotionally distressing for them. One thing as a counselor that I really feel like I need to work on will be my facial expressions in response to what students tell me. Sometimes if they tell me something shocking or disturbing, I feel like that I respond with some kind of facial expression that may convey some type of judgment. So I would like to work on affirming and encouraging facial expressions and just to be aware of that. So those are my ideas and thoughts about nonverbal communication and what we need to be aware of as counselors. Thank you.